Lesson number 15. Hi traders, welcome to the background color function lesson. For this lesson, we are starting with a blank script and I am going to set the overlay to true. Hopes that is not true. That is true. So I am going to set the overlay parameter of our indicator function to true. What this does, it makes the script, whatever we draw out of our script, draw onto price action onto our chart. So I am going to save the script and add it to my chart. Make sure that works. There we go. We are plotting the closing price as a line over price action and we are good to go. So for this lesson, I am going to show you how to change the background color of your chart to detect certain candlestick patterns. And for today's lesson, we are going to be detecting inside bars. So any bar that has its high and its low contained within the previous bar. So this would be a good example of that. Here we have a bearish candle and then the exact candle prints within the bounds of that bearish candle and therefore is an inside bar. Now we are going to cover price analysis in future lessons. So don't worry if this is getting a bit ahead for you when we start doing a little bit of price analysis here. So I am going to create a new variable here called inside and I am going to set this to a boolean value and this boolean check is going to say if the current bar's high less than the previous bar's high and is the current bar's low greater than the previous bar's low. So we are checking if the current bar's high is less than the previous bar's high and is the current bar's low greater than the previous bar's low. That gives us an inside bar. And then in order to detect this inside the bar, we are going to use the bg color function. Now to tell the bg color function when to change color and when not to change color, we need to use a boolean value. The way we do this is using what is called a ternary operator. Now don't freak out. It sounds scarier than it is. A ternary operator or a conditional operator or statement is basically a true or false statement. If X true, if so, do A. Otherwise, if X is not true, then do B. And this is what it looks like. It is a little bit like algebra. I know if you are anything like me, you hated algebra in school, but don't worry, this is extremely simple algebra. We are just saying, is X true? If it is true, do this. Otherwise, if it is false, do this instead. That is the best way to change the background color of your chart in PineScript. And I will show you how to do it right now. So we are going to say, is inside true? If so, set the background color of our chart to color.blue. Otherwise, set it to nothing or NA. And otherwise operator here is just a colon. So the way I have become accustomed to explaining this is through treating this like a question. So I say it is inside the true question mark. If so, paint it blue. Otherwise, do nothing. NA means nothing. Don't do anything. Leave the background color alone. The background of our chart has done nothing wrong. We want to leave it alone. But if we have an inside bar, then want to be notified that that is the case. So when I save the script here, we should get the background color change for these inside bars. There we go. Perfect. Well, almost perfect. It is a little bit bright. I didn't expect it to be so bright. Obviously, transparency is set to 0 by default. That did not used to be the case. Normally, background, when you set the background color of your chart, it was quite faint, but they have obviously changed that recently, and so that is fine. That is a good opportunity for me to show you how to add transparency to your background colors. Now adding transparency to all of your drawing tools is the same method in PineScript. We need to use the color new function, and in this color new function we can pass in an inbuilt color. So in this case we are working with the color blue. So we can write color blue, then we need to put in a comma so that we can pass in another parameter to this color new function, which is transparency amount to a percentage. So 100 would mean it is fully transparent. 0 would give us what we see here. So let us set this to 50 and see what it looks like. I will hit save. There we go. That is a little bit better. Now it is a little bit easier to see the candle on top of the background color. And now our script is detecting all the inside bars that are printing onto our chart. It is really simple to do. Obviously, you need to learn how to use this little ternary operator thing. But with practice, you will get the hang of this. It is actually quite simple. We will be using this a lot in future scripts. So don't worry if you don't understand this yet. It will come to you in times as you see more practical examples of it being used. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, let us have a look at other parameters that the background color function can take. The next one is offset. So I have shown you the offset in the plot function lesson if you have watched that. Hopefully you have. All of these lessons built on top of each other, one after another. So make sure to watch them in order if you are new to PineScript. But this offset parameter will just move the background color X amount of bars to the left or right. So if you put in a negative number, it will move that many bars to the left. If you put in a positive number, it will move that many bars to the right. So let us start with a negative one. For example, I will zoom in right here. Now these two background color candles will move or shift back one bar when I hit save. Watch this. Save. There we go. They have moved back. If we set this to 10, for example, now they will shift 10 bars to the right. So hit save and there we go. They are now shifting 10 bars to the right. If I scroll to the end of our chart, you can see that these background colors are way away from price action because they are being drawn offset by 10 bars. The next parameter that we can work with is editable, which I have shown you now a couple of times in the past few lessons. This just makes it so that the user cannot change the background color style in the style menu. As I keep saying, I don't know why you would want to do this, but you can if you want to. So I can set that to false, and now the user is stuck with whatever design choices I make, whatever color schemes I choose when making my script. So if you are a control freak, then maybe this parameter is for you. But I prefer not to use it. I like to give my script users as much control over my script as possible. The next parameter is show cover last. So this is how many bars to show this background color on from the last bar on our chart. So if I set this to 10, we will only see these background colors being drawn, and anything 10 bars or more to the left in historical price action from the current bar will be no longer drawn. And then finally, the final parameter we have to work with is title. So this just titles our plot. So I could call this anything I want. I could call it how deep is your love, for example. And if I save the script, maybe some of you will get that reference. Here we go. Our background color is now changed to whatever we want to title it, so that the user knows what this does. Obviously, this title is not very helpful, but you get the idea. In your own scripts, you would call this. For example, I like to use background colors for filters in my script. So maybe you could call this inside the bar filter, and maybe you don't trade status that occur when the background color of your chart has changed color, or maybe you only trade setups that occur within the shaded color on your chart. Anyway, that is it for the background color function lesson. I hope you found this interesting. If not, I apologize. The course will helpful get more engaging and interesting as we progress. I just need to teach you all this basic stuff so that when we get the more advanced stuff, you are well prepared with a solid foundation and understanding of how all these functions work, so that we don't get overwhelmed when I start pumping out lines of code like this on the fly. I don't want you to be left behind. So, as I have said before, if you are new to PineScript, make sure to watch all of these lessons, because they will be helpful in the future in terms of you understanding what is going on with more complex scripts. So, that is all. Do it. I will see you in the next one. Take care. Lesson number 16. Hi traders, welcome to the shape lesson. In this lesson, I will show you how you can use the plot shape function to plot shapes directly onto your chart. So the script you see in front of you right now is almost a blank script. All I have done is I have written two lines of code here, created two variables, two boolean variables, higher close and lower close. Higher close will only be true if the current bar's close price is higher than the previous bar's high, and lower close will only be true if the current close is lower than the previous bar's low. And then I have the plot shape function here that is plotting a shape whenever higher close is true, and that is what these blue shapes are on my chart. So you can draw shapes into their own box like we have here. I have got the overlay setting disabled, but for today's lesson, let us set the overlay to true, and we will draw these shapes above and below with the bars on our chart. So let me close this script and add it back onto my chart, and let us start playing around with the plot shape function. So the first thing I am going to do is uncomment this second line of code here, and we will be plotting x above both higher closes and lower closes. So the first thing I am going to do is to title these plots. So I will call this a higher close and this lower close. The next thing I will do is let us change the style of this shape. So to do that, we just type in style equals shape control space, and here is the list of inbuilt shapes we can use in our scripts. So I am going to go with triangle up for a higher close and triangle down for a lower close. I need to fix that typo there. So higher close will shape the triangle up. That is my favorite shape to use for detecting candlestick patterns. I usually use triangle up and triangle down to identify long and short signals in my scripts. I think it is the best shape for that. I will explain why. Let us set the other plot shape to arrow down and save the script. So now we have these triangle up shapes for higher closes and triangle down shapes for lower closes. The reason why I like using triangles instead of arrows is because of this. If I start scrolling out my chart, notice that our blue arrows have shrunk quite significantly while our triangles are still the same size that they were when we were zoomed right in or at least much closer. So the arrow shape does decrease in size as you zoom out. The triangle does so at a much less significant rate. So it is obviously a matter of preference what you use. But I am going to go with the triangle down for now. And just before we move on, let us have a quick sneak peek at some of these other shapes we have. We have got circles, we have crosses, and we have diamonds. What is? We have flags and labels down. See what they look like. So label down looks pretty cool as well for detecting long and short trades. That would not be a bad practice. We also have X cross, which is the default shape. So if you don't specify a style, the style will default to shape dot X cross. But let us change these back to triangle up and triangle down. Now the next thing I need to do is I want to move the triangle up below the bar, and notice that the shape draws above the bar by default. So technically we don't need to change the lowercase location, but we do need to change our triangle up location. To do that, we just type the location parameter. So location equals location control space, and here are our options. Let us go over all of them before we move on. The first one is above the bar. That is the default parameter or setting for this function. The next one is absolute. Let us see what that does. Save the script. Now our shapes are drawing at the very bottom of our chart, and I think what this does is it actually draws at the price you specify. So if I were to say here, hide a close question mark and draw the shape at 70,000, otherwise draw nothing. Let us save the script and see if I am right about that. And yes, that is exactly what is happening. You can see that our shapes are now drawing at 70,000 here on Bitcoin. And so the absolute location uses a price value for when you plot the shape. But let us get rid of this and see what some of other locations are. The next one is below the bar. That is the one we want for this shape. But let us check these two out first. Bottom will put the shape at the bottom of your chart display down here. So no matter how zoomed out your chart is or how you have scaled your chart, the shapes will be drawn along the bottom of your chart. And same with top. Top will do the same thing but at the top of your chart. Tada! So let us change this to the below bar and save the script. So now we are getting triangle ups drawing beneath higher close candles and triangle downs drawing above lower close candles. So that is exactly what I want to happen here. Obviously, we could specify location equals location dot above bar here if we want to, but that is redundant because this is the default setting for these shapes anyway. So let us not do that for now and let us look at some of other parameters we have. The first one is color. So color works the same way as it does in all parts in PineScript. We can set it to any color. So color RGB, a hexadecimal color or an inbuilt color if you want to. I am going to set it to color green since a higher close is technically a bullish pattern. And let us set our lower close to the color red since that is bearish. Save the script and there we go. We now have green and red arrows. Before we move on, one other thing to mention is that you can apply transparency to your shapes if you want to. I could set my triangle down to 50% transparent and now they are a little bit more faded. I don't think I have ever used transparency in my shape plots because if you are plotting shapes onto our chart, normally you want them to be as visible as possible. But the option to apply transparency is there if you need to, as it is with all plots. All functions that plot displays onto your chart in PineScript, including tables. And I am not sure about labels, but we will cover that when we get to the labels lesson. So let us move on to the rest of these functions parameters. The next one is offset. Now you should be familiar with offset by now. It applies the same way to all of our plots. Offset just shifts the plot x amount of bars to the left for a negative number and x amount of bars to the right for a positive number. And you will have to excuse me. I get quite bored sometimes when I am pumping out these lessons. I have recorded a lot of lessons today and I am getting a little bit tired of my own voice. But let us move on. The next parameter we have to work with, as I said, is offset. Let us have a quick look at that. Before we do that, because this line is getting quite long, this line of code, it is not considered good practice to have your code go too far off your screen. Now, some of my scripts do this just because I like to keep the lines of code in my script as short as possible. But it is not considered good practice to do that. If you are publicly publishing scripts, you may want to wrap this code onto multiple lines. So let me show you how to do that. And I think that is what this vertical line is the middle of our editor is for. You are supposed to keep your code to the left of this line just so it is easier to read on multiple screen resolutions. I ignore it mostly in my own script. It is obviously optional to do that, but for now, let us wrap this code onto multiple lines. To do that, I am going to start with this code here. I am going to hit enter, tab, and then space. You need to add a space after your tab is in order to avoid compile errors. If I save the script, this code works just fine. If I get rid of that space though and I save the script, we get this bad error. I am not sure why PineScript have designed it to be that way, but just keep that in mind. So now that we have our tab in space, we can move all of these parameters onto their own line. And you can even move this bracket down if you want to. And so now we have all of our parameters separated onto their own lines. We will do the same for this too because we might as well keep this consistent. And now I will just add some white space to the bottom of my chart and bring this up a little bit higher. And let us go over some of these other parameters. So the next one was offset. If I set this to, let us set it to 20, save the script. We are now offsetting our higher close candle 20 bars to the right. So if I count out 20 bars here, this bar right here is drawing on this bar right here because that is 20 bars to the right. So that is what offset does. If you set it to a negative number, it will shift it to the left. Let us get rid of that for now though. We will have a quick look at text. Text is an important parameter because we could say here SC. Let us just do SC short for higher close and we will do the same for our lower close. We will say text equals LC. Now when I save this code, we will be getting text drawing onto our chart. So this is a good way to visually identify different candlestick patterns if you want to. It does add a little bit more clutter to your chart. So that is obviously a matter of preference. But we will leave that in for now. Let us look at the next parameter, which is text color. So this changes the color of the text obviously. Let us change it to color white and see what that looks like. Text color equals color dot white. Save the script and there we go. That actually looks a little bit better I think. Let us keep moving on. The next parameter we have to work with is editable. Now, as you might know by now, if you have watched the previous lessons in this course, I don't like the editable parameter. I don't like restricting the customization of my scripts. I like my users to be able to do whatever they want. But if you want to stop your users from being able to edit the style of your shapes, so here we are on the style menu. Now that I have set our higher close plot shape to false, editable to false, we can only edit the lower close shape here. But I like to leave editable as true, which it is by default obviously, because then the user can change what they want in the setting menu. So don't use editable unless you are a control freak. And let us move on to size. Size is also an important one. If I set size to size dot control space or command space on a Mac, here are our options. So by default it is set to auto. All of our plot shapes are set to auto, which means they will scale with your chart zoom. If I set it to huge, let us see how big that gets. Save the script and they are not wrong. That is a huge shape. Actually looks something like a drawing of mountains. You would be surprised what you can achieve with a bit of boredom and playing around with some of these shapes and colors. You can get your charts looking pretty close to a Bob Ross painting. Anyway, let us have a look at some of these others. If I set it to normal and save the script, this is quite large still. But the whole point of being able to override the size is that if I zoom my chart right out, the shapes all stay the same size. Whereas if you leave in on the default auto, then the size adapts as you zoom in or out your chart. Let us just have a quick look at tiny before we move on. Doesn't look that tiny to me. I guess when you zoom in, it is definitely much smaller. But as you zoom your chart out and the lower close shapes scale down because they are set to auto, they become a similar size. And in fact, if we zoom right out, they are bigger than our lower close candles even though they are set to tiny, because the tiny is not scaling with our chart, and obviously the tiny size has more of an effect when you are zoomed in on your chart. So that is our size parameter. What do we have next? Show last and display. So show last is just how many bars to show this plot shape on our recent price action. So if I set this to 10, we only have 3 higher closes here. When you set show last to a given number, in this case 10, that means we are only drawing higher closes on the last 10 most recent bars on our chart. So that is what the show last is for. The final one is display. So display, I believe this parameter is in most plots if not all of them. So plot shapes, plot characters, the standard plot function, anything that draws a shape or a line onto a chart. You can say display to display dot, and then here are your options: display all or display dot none. By default, it is set to display dot all. If you override it to display dot none, then all of our higher close shapes will disappear, and the only way to get them back is to come up the settings menu and tick this little box to display this shape. So if I click that, all of our higher closes come back. If I tick them both off, they are both set to display dot none, and we have nothing drawing onto our chart. So that is it for the plot shape function. We will be using this quite frequently in our scripts. I use the plot shape function in all of my setup detection scripts. So you will get quite used to this function throughout the course. I rarely use more than a few of these parameters, but the course would not be complete without a complete rundown of the available options to you. So that is what this lesson was. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in the next one. Good luck with your coding. Good luck with your trading. Speak soon. Lesson number 17. Let us have a look at one of the most simple technical analysis condition we can check for in the Pine script, which is moving average crosses. Now, this is not a trading lesson. I do not encourage you to trade moving average crossovers and cross unders. They may be profitable with the right rules, the right set of rules and entry reasons, etc. I personally don't trade them, but for the purpose of this lesson, they are a great example of how easy it is to detect certain market conditions in PineScript. So to get started, we of course need two moving averages in order to detect a cross. So let us get some MAS, and again just today, because it is my favorite moving average, I am going to use an EMA, an exponential moving average, but you can use any moving average type you like. I am going to set EMA 1 to TA EMA, and we will base it on the closing price as always, and this one will have a length of 50, and then the second EMA will have a length of 100. So now before we proceed, let us draw the MAs onto our chart, and I will style the first one with a color green, and the second one can be red. So let us save the code. Make sure that this is working fine. There we go. Two moving averages on our chart. Now let us detect our crosses, our crossovers and cross unders. So we will create two variables here. Two new variables called MA crossover and MA cross under. Now for our crossover and cross under, we are going to use the inbuilt function TA dot, and then if I start writing cross here, we have our various options. Now cross will detect either a crossover or a cross under. For today, we are going to separate these two into their own variables. And so for crossover, I am going to use crossover obviously. And for cross under, we will use ta.crossunder. And now these functions take two parameters, two values that need to cross. These could be any values. They don't need to be moving average values. They could be anything. MACD lines, for example, or the RSI crossing over a certain threshold. For today, we are just going to put in EMA1 and EMA2. If I copy that into our second function here, we are now detecting our MA crosses. And at the bottom of our script, I am going to draw crosses. And here I am going to set BG color to MA crossover question mark. If the moving average has crossed over the other moving average, if EMA1 has crossed over EMA2, I will set the background color to color green. Otherwise, I will do nothing with the background color. Set it to NA. I can copy this line of code, paste it underneath, change this to cross under, and we will change the color to red. And now, if I save my script, we will be getting the background color of our chart changing based on which cross happened. So click save, and that will do it for this lesson. Very simple one here. Just again introducing you to the TA namespace and combining some of the things we have learned so far to create practical indicators that can be actually useful in our trading. Anyway, I will this one here and I will speak with you in the next lesson. The source code will be below if you want to play around with this. Lesson number 17. Hi traders, the next two lessons to wrap up this free PineScript basic course. My intention here is to give you with something practical and useful that you can go away and play with in your own Pine editor, and also to show you the kind of content that will be throughout the mastery course if you are interested in PineScript journey. As I mentioned at the beginning of this course, you can learn everything that I have learned without paying for any courses. I learned everything I know about PineScript through trial and error, practice, and reading the official documentation and just breaking down other people's scripts. But that process took me 3 years to get really proficient with PineScript. So if you want to really save time, which I think is our most precious resource as traders, we can always make more money, but we do not get more time out of life, no matter how rich you get. So if you want to save time and really speed up the learning process, cut all the crap and just learn exactly what you need to know in order to go out and build useful, practical trading tools and profitable strategies. With all that said, let us get started with the final two lessons of this course. I hope you find it interesting. Good luck with your trading and your coding. I hope you make tons of money, and most of all, I hope you have fun and enjoy yourself as much as I have throughout my own trading and coding journey. For this lesson, I thought it might be interesting to detect candlestick patterns when the RSI is overbought or oversold. So what you see on your chart right now is a script I have written that is drawing the RSI into its own indicator box here. And whenever the RSI goes oversold and we get a bullish engulfing candle, we get this bright green background drawing onto the chart. And likewise, whenever the RSI goes overboard, the line turns red. And then if we get a bearish engulfing candle, the chart turns red. The background of our chart on that bar turns red in our indicator box. Let us open up a blank script and get started. So here I am with a blank script drawing nothing onto the chart. I have set overlay to false, or at least I haven't overridden it to true, so that we are drawing into our own box. Let us get started. The first thing I am going to do for this particular script is import my Jane library. Now this is completely optional. I am only doing this to save time. My Jane library contains some candlestick pattern detection code that will just save me time in not having to write that code out in this lesson. If you want to write out your own candlestick detection code, definitely feel free to do that. But for today, I am going to import my Jane library using the import keyword and control space. I am just going to click on this and import it as Jane. So now we have the library imported. The next thing to do is get some user input. I am going to get 4 inputs here. I am going to get a look back. I am going to get an RSI length, an RSI overbought, and RSI oversold level, and then I am just going to fill these out one by one. So look back is going to be set to input.int. It is an integer and it is going to have a title of just look back and default value of 7, and I will show you what the look back is for later. The next value we are getting is an RSI length. So again input.int title equals RSI length, and the default value is also going to be 7 for this particular script. The code for today's lesson is based on a strategy that I have traded in the past that is profitable, and so I am keeping the same parameters that I use for that strategy, which are slightly different to the default inputs. We are dealing with a 7 period RSI instead of a 14 period, and we are dealing with an overbought and oversold level of 80 and 20 instead of 70 and 30. But anyway, let me write this out. I like to use floors for my RSI overbought and oversold level because it gives the user slightly more control over the value. So for this I will set it to 80.0, and for my oversold level I can copy that, rename that 80 and 20, and those are our user inputs that we need for today. But so now if I save my code here and I open up the settings menu, you can see that we can set the RSI overbought and oversold level to anything we want. We can set it to 20.5 if you want to instead of usual whole number setting. But for now we will leave it as it was. The next thing I need to do is get the RSI value. For that, we use the inbuilt function ta.rsi, and this function takes a source and a length. So I will pass in our RSI length setting into this function, and now we are getting our RSI value. The next thing we need to do is check if the RSI is overbought or oversold. So for that I am creating two new variables here called RSI sale and RSI buy. RSI sale is going to be set to is the RSI greater than RSI overbought or 80 by default. Is our RSI value greater than 80? If so, RSI sale will be set to true. And for buy, it is the opposite. RSI less than RSI OS. So is the RSI less than 20 by default, our oversold level. Now we can use these two variables later in the script to tell the script when to draw signals onto the chart. But before we detect our signals, we need to get our candlestick patterns. So here I am going to say detect candle patterns. As I said at the start of the lesson, you would write your own code here to detect whatever candlestick pattern you want. I am going to just stick with bullish and bearish engulfing candles as that is what the strategy was based on originally. So I am just going to reference my library Jane is bullish engulfing candle, and I am not going to override any of the function parameters for this engulfing candle. Same with bear EC. Jane dot is bearish engulfing candle. Now we have our bullish and bearish engulfing candles. The next thing to do is detect buy and sell signals, and that is quite simple. All we need to do is check is the RSI overbought, oversold, and do we have one of our relevant candlestick patterns. So here I can set up two new variables called buy signal and sell signal, and buy signal is going to be set to do we have a bullish engulfing candle, and then I will open up some parentheses here. I want to check is the RSI currently oversold or was it oversold on the previous bar, because quite often, especially in the case of bullish and bearish engulfing candles, sometimes the engulfing candle will close and bring the RSI up out of our oversold level of 20, but the candle before it was below 20. Let me write out the code for this. So we are detecting our bullish engulfing candle. The next thing to do is check is the RSI by variable true. So is this condition true or was it true on the previous bar? So was the RSI oversold on the current bar or the previous bar, and we got a bullish engulfing candle currently? Then we have a buy signal. Very simple strategy here, but very powerful, especially when combined with the market structure. So if you drop out to a higher time frame and you get one of these signals around a support and resistance zone, it can be a very effective counter trend trading strategy. Now for our sell signal, we do the same thing. Do we have a bearish engulfing candle? And was the RSI sale variable true? So is the RSI overbought or was it overbought on the previous bar? Was RSI sale true on the previous bar? If we was true in either of these bars and we have a bearish engulfing candle, we have a sale signal. That is really it. All that is left to do is draw the data on the chart, and I will also generate an alert when one of these conditions are true. I will show you guys how to add alert functionality to your signal detection. But for now, I am just going to copy my plot code because you have already seen me write these plot lines on code out of a million times. Hopefully by now you understand how it works. We are just plotting the RSI. the RSI overbought and oversold level and changing the background color when we have a signal. So we are plotting the RSI. Let me save the code really quickly so that I can demonstrate this visually. So we are plotting the RSI line here, and let me change it from black to gray so we can see it a little bit easier on the background color. There we go. That is a bit better. So when the RSI buy is true, meaning the RSI is oversold, we change the color of our RSI line to color dot lime green or bright green. Otherwise, if RSI sale is true, meaning the RSI is overbought, then we change the RSI line to red there. Otherwise, if the RSI is neither oversold nor overbought and it is just in the middle of nowhere, then we set the color to gray and then we set the line width to do the thicken it up a little bit. We plot our RSI overbought and oversold levels. In fact, I think a H line will look better here. So let us change this to horizontal lines dot H line plots. Save my code. I think this will look a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. I like that better. And then finally, we change the background color of our indicator box based on whether we have a buy signal or a sell signal. So similar to how we change the RSI color based on these two variables or conditions, we do the same thing here. We say, do we have a buy signal? So if the RSI oversold or was it oversold on the previous bar, and do we have a bullish engulfing candle? If so, we set the background color to green or lime. Otherwise, if we have sell signal is true, so we have a bearish engulfing candle and the RSI was overbought or oversold on the current bar or the previous bar. Then we change the background color to red. Otherwise, if either of these conditions are true, we set the background color to NA, or in other words, we just leave it alone and it gets set back to whatever our default setting is in our trading view settings, and that is it. We have a strategy, essentially a tool to help us trade, a strategy built out in PineScript. Now the final thing to add more usefulness to this tool is to add alert functionality. So let us do that. Down the very bottom here, let us trigger out alerts if any of our conditions are met. To do this, I will use the alert condition function, and here we need to save for our condition. Do we have a buy signal or sell signal? If we have either a buy signal or a sell signal, then we want to generate an alert to our phone, to our chat, to our email, however you like to set up your alerts. And we need to title this alert. So let us call this just RSI signal. And we also need to give it a message. So for this I want to say we need to name this setup. So I am just going to call it RSI exhaustion setup for, and then we can open the two curly brackets and then put ticker in here and then close those two curly brackets off. And now our alert when it gets fired, this ticker placeholder, that is what this is. The two curly brackets followed by a label in the middle will be replaced by TradingView with the ticker. So the market that we have set the alert on. So in this case, this would say RSI exhaustion setup for euro dollar or EUR, and it would replace the ticker name there. One other thing we could do here is include the RSI value. so that we know just how overbought or oversold the RSI was on this particular bar. To do that, we can open up two curly brackets and put in the plot underscores 0 placeholder and then close off those two curly brackets and then close off my parentheses. The parentheses are optional. You could put a dash here as well if you want. Maybe that is a little less confusing, less braces and brackets going on in our code. And now what PyScript will do is it will replace the plot here. Plot underscore 0 is the very first plot value in our script. So in this case, that is this plot here, the RSI value. So when this alert fires, this placeholder will be replaced with, for example, on this particular bar here, where my mouse is, it would have been replaced with 60.41009. But anyway, that sums up this script. So we have 35 lines of code. Most of which is spaces and comments, and we already have a useful practical trading tool that we can use in our trading. Now I would not recommend you to go out and blindly trade this system. It can be quite effective. As you can see here, it does detect a number of that would be losing trade, winning trade and losing trade. But depending on how you trade this particular strategy, if you combine it with other filters such as market structure, you can get some really nice trading setups out of this kind of tool. Oh, and I nearly forgot to mention, the way you set alerts on the script is you need to come up to the alert button here or press Alt A on your keyboard and select our script. So RSI oscillator is what I called my script. Click on that and then select the RSI signal in the condition drop down box, and then whatever you set up here will dictate how that alert fires. If you set it to once per bar, the alert will fire even before the candle closes. So you might get a lot of false signals firing alerts. That can be useful though if you want to be notified of a potential trading setup before it happens, so that you are not in a rush to get your trade sorted once that signal is confirmed. But if you are proficient with your trading process and you can place trades really quickly, then you just set it to once per bar close and you will be notified as soon as the signal is confirmed and the bar closes as a valid signal. Anyway, that will do it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one. Lesson number 18. Welcome back to another lesson. In this lesson, I am going to show you how to convert the previous lesson's indicator, this RSI oscillator indicator, into a script that draws onto price action and shows you your stops and targets. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this course section, in the introduction to the technical analysis functions, you cannot draw over price action into your own indicator box in the same script. You need two different scripts in order to achieve that. And in this lesson, I am going to show you how we can basically copy and paste all of the code out of this lesson, the script that we created in the previous lesson, into a new script and adjust it slightly so that instead of drawing the signals like this, it actually draws our stops and targets over price action. So first of all, before we start, if you haven't watched the previous lesson, you probably should, because I am not going to cover what all of the source code here does in this lesson, since I have already did that. So if you did skip ahead, make sure to go back and check out if you want to know what is happening here with the code, because right now I am going to copy all of this code into a new script called RSI. I will just call it RSI chart signals and tidy this up a little bit. And for this script, I am going to set overlay to true. I am going to paste in all of our source code here. I am going to comment out our plots and set the plot down here to NA just so that the script compiles. And I need to get rid of this duplicate indicator annotation function. So here we go. We basically have our same script that we were working with in the previous lesson drawing over price action. Same core logic of the script. The guts of the script is still the same. The main difference is we are drawing over price action, and I have commented out all of our indicator box plots because we are not going to be using these in today's lesson. So I can get rid of all of these. We can leave the alert condition function in here. There is no reason not to generate alerts here for this script. And now if I save the script and add it to my chart, we now have our script drawing over price action, but we are not actually drawing anything yet. To draw what we need onto our chart, we need to get a couple of other values. I am going to add another input parameter here called multiplier, and this is going to be our stop loss multiplier. So I needs to be a float, and we will call this ATR multiplier. We will give it a default value of 1.0. The next thing we need to do is get the ATR value. I am going to be using ATR based tasks and targets for this particular script. So for that I need to get the ATR from the ta.atr function. I will just use the default 14 period length, and now that we have the ATR and we are detecting our candlestick patterns, all we need to do now is calculate our stops and targets. So down here I will say calculate stops and targets, and here is where the magic will happen. So for a long stop, we will have a long stop and short stop. For long stop, because we are trading bullish engulfing candles, what I might do is subtract the ATR from the lowest low over the past. Now in the previous lesson, I forgot to mention that this look back setting is not actually used in the oscillator version of our script, but we are going to use it in this version of the script. And what we are going to do is we are going to use this look back period to specify how far back to look over price action for swing lows and swing highs to base our stop loss on. So by default it is set to 7. So the script will look back 7 bars for the lowest low in the case of a bullish trade, and add ATR to that low to give us our stop loss. For a long stop, we need to get the TAL lowest low over our look back period, and then we need to subtract the ATR value multiplied by our multiplier, and that will give us our long stop loss price. And now we can do the same thing for short stops. We need to ta.est high over our look back period plus the ATR multiplied by our multiplier. Now let us plot this data to the chart. The first thing I am going to do is use plot shape to plot when we have a buy signal and plot shape to plot when we have a sell signal. I will give this a style of shape triangle up and a color of color green and a location of location below bar. I am going to copy this code, change this to red and this to down and this to above bar. So now we should be drawing. If I save my code, we should be drawing arrows above. If I save my code, we should be drawing arrows above and below our bearish and bullish signals. So far so good. The next thing to do is to plot our long stop and short stop. So for that we can say plot and then we need to check do we have a buy signal question mark. If so plot our long stop, otherwise plot nothing. And we will give this a color of color red since it is a stop loss, and we can copy this line of code and put in sell signal here and short stop. And now if I save our code, we should be getting our stop loss drawing above and below our signals, which you can see there. If I zoom right in, you can see our little red line there. That is our stop loss. So we enter at the close and our stop loss is this far away. So we enter at the close and our stop loss is this far away. And if you hover over the setup bar here, you can see the exact price that we need to set our stop loss to, which is extremely helpful when entering trades into your trade panel. But anyway, so now we are drawing our signals onto the chart. We are drawing our stop loss for each setup. All that is left to do is draw our take rate. Now to do that, I need to create two new variables here called long target and short target. Now to make it easier to calculate these values, I am going to create another two variables here called long stop distance and short stop distance. And this will be the distance in pips or points from our entry to our stop loss on both bearish and bullish trades. And to get that value, I simply need to subtract our long stop from our closing price, which is our entry price. Or in the case of a short stop, since the stop loss is above the close, we need to subtract closing price from our short stop in order to get a positive value. Now to get our target, we just need to add the long stop distance for our closing price for long trades or subtract it from short trades. So I can now copy our stop loss draw code and change this to long target and short target and change the color to green since it is a take rate value. And now when I save my script, I should be getting a green line. There we go, drawing one from our entry to our stop up to our target. There we go, perfect. 1:1 risk reward profile. Let us make sure the short trade is the same. And there we go, perfect. So that is pretty much it for our script. The final thing to do is just add our risk reward profile setting into the mix. That is really easy to do. All we need to do is add some parentheses around our long stop and short stop distance and multiply this distance value by our risk reward setting. So now when I save my code and I minimize the editor, if I tick my risk reward profile, let us try 2:1. Now our take profit extends while our stop loss stays in place. And that is about it for this lesson. One last thing I will do before we finish this lesson. If I zoom out my chart a bit here, you can see we have these lines connecting all over the place. I forgot to set our line style on our plot on our buy and sell signal long and stops and targets code to line break. So we need to add on the end here style equals plot dot cont control space style line break, and this will break the line between signals. So what you are seeing here is we have a long trade here and a long trade here. TradingView is connecting the lines between signals because I did not set the style to line break. So now if I copy this down across all of our plots and save my code, all of these lines will go away. There we go. So now we just have the stops and targets drawing above and below the relevant signals. Alright, I think that will do it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one.